Education reform is on the front burner, and the governor is turning up the heat. How will education shape New Jersey's future? How will our children be educated? And where do parents fit into this equation? That's next on this powerhouse edition of Meet the Leaders from the New Jersey Black Issues Convention. Welcome to Meet the Leaders. I'm Alfred Bundy. Unity, survival, and progress. That is the theme of this year's milestone Black Issues Convention, celebrating 30 years of bringing African American leaders from all over New Jersey to this conference. We are here in New Brunswick to discuss the future of education, particularly in our urban centers. We have a powerhouse panel of legislators and experts joining us today in front of a live studio audience. Please welcome Assemblywoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. Assemblywoman Coleman is the Vice Chair of the Assembly Education Committee. Assemblyman Benjie Wimberly, he is a member of the Joint Committee on Public Schools. Walter C. Farrell Jr., Professor, School of Social Work, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Professor Farrell is often called upon for his expertise in public education. Assemblyman Troy Singleton, he's a member of the Assembly's Education Committee. And Kevin Jenkins, Vice President of Operations for Excellent Education for Everyone. E3 promotes school choice in New Jersey urban centers. Lastly, in full disclosure, education is near to my heart. I perform consulting work for E3, but I'm also the professional host for Meet the Leaders. I respect everyone's opinion and look forward to a lively discussion about the future of education in our state. With that said, let's get started. First guest, we have too many failing schools in our cities. Now, who or what should we blame? Is it actually the parents? Is it the students? Is it the funding? Is it state takeover? Is it the commissioner? Or is it even the governor? I'm going to start with the loveliest person we have on the panel, Assemblywoman Bonnie Watson Coleman. What do you think? What do you think?
Well, I think that it can be a little bit of all of the above. It can be the fact, I think parents are very important to education, but I think parents are in many respects kind of lost in our urban environments and distracted by things that are happening in our urban environment, including the lack of employment, the lack of services, and the lack of safety and security, and the lack of decent housing. So I think the lack of parental involvement is something that's very important. I think the fact that this state in particular has not invested sufficiently in public education, and under the last 3 years has done a significant disinvestment in public education, is a very serious a problem for schools to overcome. I think that the very nature of our schools, the old schools, the fact that they're not 21st century schools in our urban centers is a serious issue. Our children need the kind of learning environment that they're excited to be in. I think the fact that we teach, I have one more thing, and then I think the fact that we're teaching too much to a test and not reading, writing, arithmetic, and critical thinking and how to build character. I think those all contribute to the failing experiences that we're having. And I think that the fact that we're expecting such little out of urban schools right now also supports this failure to achieve at the highest levels.
Let me ask you now, there was some money that was put away to build a lot of new schools. Has that happened in the cities, or are we still behind? Still behind? No. All right. Let me move on to Assemblyman Benjie Wimberly. What do you think? Who do we blame? Who do we look at? Why?
It's a combination, as Assemblywoman Coleman stated. I mean, I'll give you Patterson for an example. 22 years, I believe, of state takeover. 7 different state district operated superintendents. I think the building of maybe 2 new facilities, 19 facilities over 100 years old. I mean, the learning environment to start off is not conducive for a successful student. I mean, our classrooms are cold in the wintertime and hot in the summertime. The overall environment of our communities, when you talk about properly funding our school districts, it's not there. The overall, like I said, when you look at a kid that wakes up hungry, has to walk to school by himself, doesn't know who's gonna be at home, better yet help them do homework, or better yet grandma's taking care of them. These are all factors that do not make things, put things in line for our children to become successful. Proper teacher training. I mean, there are so many things that go on and on about, but the combination is just not there for a successful school district.
State takeover. I mean, good thing, bad thing? Is it time for the takeover to come back?
It hasn't worked for the city of Patterson. I'd rather have local control where we pick our own superintendent, where our superintendent grew up in our neighborhoods, understands our children, that the administrators that work in our community, shop in our community, live in our community, get their hearing in our community. And I think that will make for better school districts, not just in Patterson, but most urban centers.
Professor Farrell, what do you think? Who do we blame for some of the failing schools? Or how do you see it?
I would agree with the first two speakers. This is a combination of everyone, and parents in urban communities, whatever their racial or ethnic background, are under tremendous social and economic stress, violence, unemployment, and for instance, Newark and Camden, 59% or more of African American males are unemployed. Now that has impact across the board, you know. Then the state and the federal government, to some extent, has disinvested in urban communities. And what is emerging that nobody wants to talk about, they've decided that the control in urban communities, which in New Jersey and across the country are disproportionately minority, they don't want individuals to have power and control over public dollars. So you can't move the people, so you move the money. And that's what the move to charter schools, vouchers, the Urban Hope Act, all these other scams, and nobody will benefit of color from these initiatives. There are failing majority white districts of the more than 600 in New Jersey. No state takeover there, and nobody ever talks about that. This is about money. This is not about children and people who advocate for that, and the organizations that promote these alternatives to public education are funded by the right and organizations that are wholly funded by individuals who don't live in the community. I'll give you one example, the Black Alliance for Educational Option. All of that money comes from the Koch Foundation, the Walton Foundation, the Bradley Foundation. No black people are contributing to that, but they say, we want to help urban children. This is about moving the money. We've had, and this is a grand, vicious, pernicious experiment, and we've seen an experiment before. Now we're 20 years into vouchers. We saw this experiment from 1932 to 1972. It was called the Tuskegee experiment. And this was supposed to improve health care for African Americans, remove syphilis. Syphilis was solved in 1947 when penicillin came onto the market. They continued the experiment for another 25 years because they didn't care, and they tried it on two populations, African Americans and Latinos in Mexico. Never were those trials to cure syphilis perpetrated on majority communities. And so what we have is a perpetration of experimentation on poor communities of color, not only in New Jersey, but across this country.
We'll stop right there. Kevin Jenkins, same question. Who you look at, who we fail, parents, students, who?
I think all of the panelists have stated, all of the above, but one of the things we need to do is move beyond that kind of discussion, and I'll tell you why. As of today in our communities, a large proportion of our community, our kids, will not be able to be competitive in the global market whatsoever. Forget about the regional market, but the global market. As far as parents are concerned, I think we do need to invest more in empowering our parents and developing collaborations on the union side or the parent side or the political side to really drive a different kind of thought process about education in our communities. Listen, it's really simple for us to sit here and say, these are all of the negative elements that are pushing a broad discussion about what they want to see in urban education. But I think it's our problem and our issue, and we should be driving that discussion. Listen, in Estonia right now, they're driving discussions about their kids participating at a different level in math and science to make them more competitive. So should our schools be more innovative? Yes. Should our schools have more parent, participation? Yes. We need to be driving that discussion. I mean, listen, for 30 years, Vic has been engaged in having these kinds of debates about where our communities should be going. And guess what? Sadly, we have not moved anywhere because we still are having this conversation. Listen, our kids and our communities are not even thought of when it comes to these national debates and local debates about where our kids should be in the future as it relates to urban and economic development. Education drives that thought, and that's where I want to be. I think that's where E3 wants to be in the future. We're going to be more collaborative. We're going to be more focused on where education is going to be driving our communities, because at the end of the day, all of these social negatives that we keep talking about is the bottom line is education and capital. And 30 years we've been having this conversation, and it's just no longer acceptable. So, I mean, am I finished now?
No, you can go finish your thought.
Finish, go ahead.
Assemblyman Troy Singleton, what's your thought?
Well, first of all, I think you have a wide, varied group of opinion leaders here, and I think you've hit the nail on the head, and everyone has touched on it in a great detail. It is a combination of a lot of factors. It is our parents having to get them more engaged in our school districts. It is our school educational establishment making sure that they're working to turn out the best and brightest children, especially in our urban core. And for all of us as opinion leaders, as elected officials, it's also our responsibility to come to the table with new and creative ideas to advance the education paradigm and move forward. I think our charge here today and our charge every day, whether we're blessed to be in government or out of government, is to make sure that we continue to put our children first. And in the urban center where our children are being disproportionately treated negatively through education and economic empowerment, that's something that I know myself wake up every day trying to find a way to advance that community. And I know the members of this panel do as well. So it is a combination of a lot of factors, but it's our charge to, rather than continue to assign blame, to decide what are we going to do to effectuate a positive solution.
Let me ask you, Assemblyman, there was a recent inquiry poll done that showed where 85% of Latino and African Americans felt optimistic towards urban schools being improved and turned around. At the same time, only 75% of white Americans felt that way. But there was another interesting thing about the poll. The poll at the same time, African Americans, almost 85%, gave a lower opinion of their schools and what was going on in their community. How do you look at those results?
Well, I think we need to begin to look at education as we would, as consumers, look at products that we would go out and buy and sell. We send our children, one of the greatest things that our school system does, we entrust the men and women of our school system to produce our future leaders, to produce better citizens when we take them in than when they leave. And for us, if those numbers indicate that a vast majority, 80-some-odd% of individuals are saying the product that they're getting, the product that we are all paying for, is not sufficient to their needs. So we can do a lot of things. We can either sit back and continue to accept that, or try and look for a way to change that paradigm and make those percentages different and make sure that we're aggressively trying to move the education conversation into a direction where that 85% is in the converse, where we have 85% of our urban parents who are supportive of their educational piece. For me, it's in simple terms as if we would buy something that I would either look at my children and say, you know what, I want to make sure they have something better than I did, which was something, the legacy my mother and my father gave to me. They worked hard enough to ensure that. I think we all believe that our education establishment can be better. The question is, how are we going to get to an outcome that allows that to happen? Will that be trying to work in the existing system, or try and talk about collaborative ideas that we can put forth to make the system better? And I think that's all any of us care about. I know there's a lot of talk about, outside influences, and I agree, because some of these organizations with their outside agendas are completely corrupting the idea of making sure that our children have the opportunity to get ahead. But those of us who believe that this is still about our kids, our education system is still about our children, it is incumbent upon us to stand up and be the voices to say we need to effectuate change and do it now.
Kevin Jenkins, how do you respond to that poll? Lack of, optimism about how they really feel about it on a regular basis, even though they believe the schools can be turned around.
Well, I think a lot of parents are disconnected. I think a lot of communities are disconnected about what's happening in those schools. I mean, we hear a lot of times when we have these kind of panels how negative things are. So if you're marketing that every day, you're saying that there are no good things happening in certain schools, forget charter, but certain good public schools, because you really do, that means that we have a cultural issue. We have a marketing issue, and we have a leadership issue. I said, because this should be out in front on everything that we're doing from the last several decades to this decade. So I think the reason why you're getting those negatives is because there's no real connect to a broader vision that Assemblyman Singleton is talking about, of taking ownership of it and driving that debate on our own, which will then kick up some of that support they might see as it relates to education.
Let me ask you, Assemblywoman, there is a lot of discussion about the middle class, especially during this presidential election, but what impact does poverty and those who are struggling with economic challenges have as far as it relates to our children succeeding in urban schools?
I think that in some respects in the urban centers we're beyond poverty, because poverty suggests a lack of financial resources. I think we're impoverished. I think that we're impoverished emotionally.